I'd like to welcome you to our seventh in the series of our Miami Open Studies sessions. Miami, Do You Love Me? I should mention just briefly that Miami, Do You Love Me is the Italian. It comes from the Italian Miami, which means you love me. So today, the idea behind these sessions is really to kind of have a look at the B side, as it were, of Miami, to try and draw out the more interesting and unusual um, uh, aspects or characteristics of Miami behind the scenes. And I think today is a perfect example of that. Art Basel is, of course, is the front of Miami, of the art scene. It's a large commercial venture that attracts a lot of attention. But there is another art scene behind the world of Miami. Before introducing Felice Grodin, who will introduce her team, as it were, I just want to mention that I'm supported today by Diann an esteemed colleague at Florida International University. Diann is not only a distinguished scholar in her own right, working in areas of such as AR, VR, and data visualization. She's also a member of the Acadia board. She's also on the Digital Futures board, and she's been working with Shaheen Vazig to get a number of prestigious NSF grants while at FIU. It's wonderful to have her in support. So today I'd like to start by welcoming one of my colleagues at FIU, Felice Grodin, who has a very interesting history in her own right. She was born in Bologna, and we know from previous sessions that Bologna is the culinary capital of Italy. It's also where Alberti was educated. And from last week, we heard that Shufan was studied. Shinfu was studied in Bologna under Umberto Eco. It's a very distinguished place in its own right. But she subsequently moved to the States, studied architecture, took a Bachelor of Architecture at Tulane University, where her thesis was a recipient of the Thomas J. Lupo Award for Metropolitan Studies. Subsequent to that, she studied at the Harvard Graduate School of Design, GSD, where she was awarded a distinction for her proposals. I'm going to invite Felice to introduce her colleagues, part of the Alliance of Southern Triangle, a group of artists of which she is now part, and welcome everyone.
Thank you, Neil, for that wonderful introduction. And it's great to be here and join all of you for this. Neil, you actually introduced me quite well, so I'm not going to expand too much upon that, but I'll just say that in addition to my architectural background, I have been practicing art, both as an independent artist and within this collaborative. And I am particularly interested in technology, which is kind of a theme I think that runs throughout this program. And so are we actually within the collaborative. So before I sort of kick off the sort of collaborative itself, I would like each of my collaborative mates to just briefly talk a little bit about themselves and say hello. I'm going to start with Patricia. I'm going to hand it off to you, aka Patty.
Hi, I'm Patricia Margarita Hernandez. I am a curator based now in New York City, originally from Miami, Florida. My research interests span design, feminism, intersectional feminism, decolonial theory in relation to climate change. And one of my main projects is this one, Alliance of the Southern Triangle. So now I'll pass it off to Elite Kedan.
Oh,
Elite, you're on mute, you're on mute.
Sorry. Hi, I'm Elite Kedan. I also live in Miami along with Felice, and like Felice, I also teach at FIU. I have a background in architecture and master's in architecture and urban design. And I also have an art practice, a good part of it, which is this collaborative. I'm happy to be here. So I'm going to pass it off to Diane Bauer next.
Hi, thanks guys. Yeah, my name is Diane Bauer. I'm an artist and writer, and I'm based in London. I actually do have a bit of an architectural background, but left it left it behind me. I studied at Cooper many years ago, but I'm mostly an artist now and do dabble with writing, trying to get words in order that makes sense too. So I'm part of obviously Alliance of the Southern Triangle, but I'm also part of a working group called Laboria Cubonics that wrote Xenofeminism in 2015. So my interests are definitely technology and feminism, and also climate change, which is, and urbanism, which I suppose is what the main focus of A.S.T is, I guess. Most of my work, I suppose, most of my visual work, I guess, is video work, but also drawing. Maybe I'll leave it at that for the moment. And Felice, I don't know if did you want to say anything about A.S.T itself? Or?
Absolutely. So I'm going to kick it off, guys, with the collaborative. And thank you for those great intros. So I'm just going to quickly read a few things about us, just as pertaining to what we are. Alliance of the Southern Triangle, otherwise known as A.S.T, was established in 2015 and consists of Diane Bauer, myself, Felice Grodin, Patricia Margarita Hernandez, and Ali Kedan. We work in the fields of art, architecture, and urban design. A.S.T began as a research project focusing on the idea of the global city, with a focus on Miami as a case study. The project is committed to the idea that developmental trajectories of a city can be altered through the adaptation of the networks that already control it, paired with creative rethinking of what a city can be. A.S.T uses the interdisciplinary space of art to function as a platform upon which to conceive of these possible futures that are both reactive and propositional with regard to the shifting set of legal, economic, cultural, and of course, environmental forces that confront us. So with that said, I'm going to turn it over to, once again, Patty, who's going to kick it off.
So the title of our talk today is Climate Crisis Because Art Basel. Someone once told me that Miami is only relevant 4 days out of the year. And the 4 days that he was referring to was Miami, Art Basel, Miami Beach. Now, the short-sightedness of this comment really shouldn't elicit an emotional response or the production of a list of justifications. The short-sightedness of this observation is that it fails to recognize how a global contemporary art apparatus, such as Art Basel, functions at a structural and infrastructural level, at a city scale, not just a gallery scale, and on a temporal range of decades and not just days. For those of us who are not aware, Art Basel is a conglomerate, a for-profit international art fair that is staged annually in Basel, Switzerland, Miami Beach, and Hong Kong. The fair brings Miami specifically an average of 269 international galleries across 29 countries. And for those who do not live in Miami, this becomes a welcomed getaway to live out cliched fantasies of margaritas on the beach. This industry trade show breeds a lack of intimacy, conviction, and patience that real art requires. It is a place and a time of year when celebrities and art enthusiasts descend upon our city for a week of fairs, parties, and guest lists. And the next series of images are essentially what you get when you type in Art Basel Miami Beach. And really what you begin to understand is that it's really about the spectacle. And together with contemporary art, Art Basel promises Miami tourist development, million-dollar art, water main upgrades, luxury districts of design, transportation improvements, water pumps, capital campaigns, starchitects, and content generators. Miami, in this context, Miami is at a crossroads where neoliberal finance and culture intersects. It is a place where you come to party and retire. The next area is always being gentrified. The beaches are usually packed while the swamp continues to toxify in the background. It is a place where development companies buy property, build high rises, and dictate how the general population moves through the city. Yet Miami is sinking due to sea level rise and climate change, and still it remains a port city where financial markets flow in and out of the United States, a place where drugs come in, a place where information travels through, an entry into the U.S. and the U.S. an entry into the U.S. for the Caribbean and Latin America. Miami exploits this lifestyle branding through Caribbean flavors, palm trees, sunsets, high-end shopping, vacation vibes, and relaxation. So in this way, the idea that Miami is only relevant 4 days out of the year just proves how this city is a paradigm for a globalized relationship between contemporary art and economic development. And Miami becomes relevant precisely because it localizes a global condition. And as such, it's an ideal site for a project of agency and traction that creates a shift away and a pivot out of these dominant conditions. In this context, Miami is a presentation for an investment portfolio in a drowned future that doesn't need to happen in order to actualize a profitable now. It is a city where the imminent threat of climate change affects the fuel and the need to further buy. And here we see almost a perfect image of what Miami is. You know, a young woman poised on top of a fire hydrant while the city is essentially flooding or drowning. And much like our Basel, it's this like veneer of spectacle. You know, she sits there calm, almost set up, you know, as a photo shoot staged for a drowned city.
And so now we're going to transition into presenting some of our projects as ways that we use to kind of work through some of these issues. And this is one of our earlier projects done for the History Miami Museum called Landscape Test Patterns for Future Positions. And if you pardon me, I will actually read something. There is a Florida threshold that divides what is built and what is destroyed. The wall that divides interior and exterior spaces may be violated by the burst of wind pressure or a TV monitor that can graph the polarities of an oncoming hurricane path to Chamber of Commerce promotional videos espousing low tax rates and opportunities for industry in Florida. As we hover above and below the rising ocean, we're also situated at the gateway between systems of nature and artifice, of future and past. The porosity of such a space was embedded within this installation, which borrowed moving images and objects via the Wolfsonian Archive and History Miami Museum Archive. The idea for this project was all the pieces in this group show were drawing on archival footage. In addition, the work spliced the climate of that time, it was in 2017, by incorporating found or produced footage. And it featured design and fabricated elements which trap this condition and utilize immersive projection mapping alongside a single channel video on an adjacent monitor. This project gave us the opportunity to continue our study of immersive environments and the relationship between context, scale, and process. The archival and found footage was used as test case media to simulate a series of speculative landscapes and conditions found within South Florida's history. As seen here in these images, we have some GIFs and stills. The set of archival material oscillated in scale and meaning between literal material presence of the space, of the one-to-one physical space that you inhabited, and the illusion of the simulated environments being projected. So this project gave us the historical underpinning of what the real Miami looks like and how one example of this contemporary coastal condition might look like. So anyway, in this context, our practice aims to kind of better understand as well as communicate how to live amidst this climate emergency. And we're trying to use contemporary art as a platform for speculation, enabling alternative futures to emerge. I think now we're going to transition into another project.
Thank you, Alid. I'll take the baton, so to speak, now, and roll with that, because time is something that is a tool, in essence, in our practice. So previously, we kind of looked at history in this sense, in terms of the previous project, but the future is not a foregone conclusion either. And so in order, though, to understand past, present, and future, we need to, in a way, begin to have them speak to one another. And so one of the projects that we began to really start to synthesize that idea was a project called Intertidal. Intertidal is an exhibition that we did on Miami Beach, as a matter of fact, at the former space known as Art Center South Florida. Currently, it's called Light Arts. Essentially, it consisted of an entire exhibition, which contained within it a 4-channel video installation, a complete exhibition design, pretty much soup to nuts in this case. And I'm just going to read a little bit about it in terms of what we were trying to deal with in terms of this collapse of time, and really begin to feel our way through this particular situation. In 2018, A.S.T. was commissioned by curator Natalia Zulagwa, again, with formerly known as Art Center, Light Arts now, to create a multidisciplinary experience of what speculative urbanism may feel like in the age of sea level rise. Featuring, excuse me, whoops, one moment, I'm sorry. Featuring newly commissioned videos, audio scripts, wall drawings, and architectural interventions, Intertidal reads like a scrambled series of messages. Excuse me, my computer's glitching out. In any case, instead of sounds, images, and environment created by A.S.T, we posit its distinct position between swamp and sea as a leader in getting submerged, and as such proposes how the city could be a model for best how to proceed. So basically what we're trying to do, and I'm sorry that my computer's a bit wonky right now, but in terms of what we were trying to explore was how to trap this particular condition and not necessarily comment on it as such as of yet, but essentially just begin to grapple with it as a condition. And with that said, I think I'm just going to segue, therefore, into the video, which is what Patty is running. I'm going to read a little something that we wrote about this condition. The Intertidal Zone, also known as the foreshore and seashore, and sometimes referred to as the Littoral Zone, is the area that is above water at low tide and underwater at high tide. In other words, it's the area between tidal marks, and that's in fact the Wikipedia definition. Another great quote is by a scientist, where the scientist says, "Go find an old photograph of a seawall and then get a new photograph of it. Then you'll see that the barnacles have moved up. The barnacles and all of these animals are tied into the very narrowly defined range of sea level. They don't know science. They don't read science. They don't do any of that. What they do is respond to the actual position of the ocean, and they're moving up. So therefore, if sea level rise is a reality, then the barnacles of our smoking gun, the barnacles are our smoking gun. As they migrate upwards, claiming new territory, they simultaneously mark our imprint on sea level rise. The littoral zone defines the strata of this brave new world. It is never totally solid or liquid, never fully above or below. It's porous in all directions, with the fluidity of water in a gravitational dance between the earth, moon, and sun, punctuated by increased atmospheric carbon, increased atmospheric methane, lower oceanic acidity, increased permanent organic pollutants, and global species transfer, to name a few. If this sounds like a soupy mess, then it certainly is one we are all in. So just to conclude my jumbled intro a bit here, what then is the way through the littoral zone? Well, if we consider Deleuze and Guattari's three strata, inorganic, or in other words, the geological, or organic, the biological, and or the alloplastic, meaning the social. The littoral zone consists of all three simultaneously. If we zoom in scale and consider our local context, the geology of our area is limestone. Zoom in further, and the formation of the stone is actually compressed, fossilized, and calcified, remnants of ancient sea creatures. We're built upon remains, bodies on top of bodies. Barnacles take this step further. They communally aggregate, and within the littoral zone, they form an assemblage of exoskeletons comprised through a process of biomineralization. In other words, their structures are made of the stuff of limestone, calcium carbonate, in fact. They resurrect the minerals of the dead, which is the inorganic, and fuse them with their own, the organic, substance and create form from the nanoscale up. But what of us? We must now zoom back out. So in a sense, Intertidal was a way to begin to explore this condition. And again, I'm going to leave off with the way I started this with regard to time. How then is time more active? So I'm just going to transition to some video work. But before I do that, one of the things we do in the practice as well is we actually discuss these issues within the art world proper, but actually without, beyond the art world proper. So we believe very much in alliances. And so on the slide on the image on the left, we did do a discussion at Art Center with the curator, who's on the right, the right side of me, Natalia Zulagua. And on the right, we actually invited Marie Stryber-Rice, who is, she works at the A.S.T Center, I believe, at University of Miami. And she is involved with media and climate change and science. And so we begin to work actually transversely in terms of transdisciplinary dialogue. And so this is something that we're actually quite interested in. But I'm going to pitch now it over to Diann, who's going to talk a little bit more about time and certainly within the context of Intertidal.
Hi, thanks. Yeah, I mean, just a second before I dive into that, this stuff that Felice is saying and how important that the discourse is for our practice. I mean, I think we don't necessarily see just the stuff we make as the work. I mean, the work is very much reaching out and using the art field as a platform to pull people in. I mean, as an artist, you can sort of approach people and say, like, will you come talk to us about this? And you can get people from different disciplines to talk to each other in ways that they might not be willing to within the rigor of their own discipline. So this is something that we're interested in very much, using the art field in that way, sort of like kind of using the purported freedom of art, this sort of fantasy that in art art can be whatever you want it to be, which isn't actually true. But if we sort of take that claim to task and use it. With regard to this video, so the video that we're gonna show, it's 12 minutes long. I think this is sort of a question for Neil, actually. Do we have time to play the whole thing, or should we just play part of it?
Sure. No, please.
Okay, all right. I suppose, I mean, 12 minutes for us is quite long, but I suppose in the world of the art video, it's not that long. So maybe we'll play the whole thing. Just to say a couple of things ahead of time. Another important part of the whole Intertidal, the content of the Intertidal exhibition, in addition to thinking through this condition, this sort of liminal condition, was also communication, thinking about communication with the past and communication with the future. So we had done a project previously for the Sharjah Biennale, and one of the main questions in that installation is, how do you communicate with the future? And through making that work, we sort of came to realize that actually you're always communicating with the future. Like, anything you do is an automatic communication with the future. The problem is actually, how do you communicate with the past? That's sort of the much trickier thing. That's the thing that you got to turn sort of second law of thermodynamics on its head. So that's a little bit of a taller order. So I think one of the questions, or the position that we made this main video from, was from the position of someone in the future trying to communicate with us in the now. So how this question of like, how do we, if I am someone in Miami in 300 years time, how do I let the people in the early 21st century know what happened, to take seriously the claims that are around? So it's sort of loose speculative fiction around that. It's not a direct narrative. You'll see it's sort of it's a text-based work. The sound primarily comes from Yanis Xenakis, mixed in with some other things. Maybe we'll just play it, and if there's any questions, we can sort of discuss it later on. But I wanted to make that point that it's sort of made from the perspective of subjects from the future. So I don't know. We did have one thought that if people could watch it on YouTube, if this doesn't work in terms of glitchiness, we could swap over. So if it gets too messy, we can just give everyone the YouTube link in the chat. But maybe we'll try this in the first instance and see how we go. So it depends on internet connections. So Patty, if you want to give it a shot, and we'll see how we go with this. Okay, I want to run just a few credits before we move on from the video. Some of the part of the script is taken from Benjamin Bratton. There's a lecture he did sort of before he published the stack, but it was from a lecture, but I'm sure it's in the book as well. Towards the end, there's a few quotes. Also, there's a bit of animation that is not ours, which is in a mine. There's like a sort of a metro-sized mine workers, and that's from a film called All Up in My Grill by Unknown Fields and Toby Smith. And as I said in the beginning, the sound is from Yanis Xenakis. There's a few other things in there that I'm sure I'm missing, but those are the ones that I wanted to just say for sure. Yeah, there's a few interesting comments that came up in the chat that maybe I think after we finish talking about the work, I might like to come back to, because yeah, this question of noise is really interesting, and sort of running things backwards in communication and all this. And I suspect actually you guys might have more knowledge about this even than we do. So I'm really happy to open that up to discussion. It's something that we're still very interested in. Do we want to move? Was there more on this, or should we move on to the protocols?
Protocols, perfect. Okay. Starting to get chilly. I had a moment of sun in London, but the sun's still here, but it's starting to get cold. Okay, so this project was something that we came to at the beginning of the spring of 2020. And I think A.S.T. as a project, we've been working together now for, what is it, like 6 years now. And I think we're in this constant process of trying to understand what it is we are and what it is we do. I mean, I think, as I said sort of earlier, and as we've all sort of alluded to, like, we're all artists, but we're not particularly interested in sort of making like the object that hangs on the wall or goes into something like Frieze. And I think we're interested in trying to use art in the art field for other purposes and sort of push it and see what it can do. But in the process of trying to sort of make up what art is, it means we have this perennial problem of figuring out just what the hell it is that we're doing. And we had been talking for a while of like wanting to write a text and sort of laying out what, I suppose what we thought was most urgent. And then the pandemic came along and it kind of gave us the perfect context to really sit down and try to pin some of this stuff down. So we wrote this text called Protocols for the Fades Transition, which is 8 little blips of text, 8 sort of claims, I suppose. And it's laying out these 8 concepts of things that we think need urgent attention, need rethinking, possibly need redefining as the 21st century moves forward. And things like adaptation, these are the 8. There's adaptation, territory, navigation, scale, time, risk, translation, and alliances. So rethinking what these terms mean in the given context, both the context of the pandemic as well as climate change, as well as development of technology, AI, as things sort of move forward. Like these are the terms, these are the concepts that I think we decided needed some extra attention. So we wrote this text, and there's 8 videos to go along with them to sort of think out these texts. And I think in a way it sort of sets out like a map for us going forward. I mean, I think we're now in the process of doing a series of conversations with people, trying to pull people in to have more, to elaborate these further. So it's sort of the beginning of a larger bit of work. But I think we might like to show a couple of the videos. I might actually I was just looking again at the intro. I think I will read the intro because I think it gives an idea of what the project was. So we published it in Strelka magazine over the summer. So I'm just going to read the intro that we wrote for that. So it's summer of 2020 and our operating systems are failing.
Systemic inequality has been exacerbated at both local and planetary scales by the current pandemic, intensifying the demand for systemic justice. Yet we now exist in an unstable condition of flux, highly volatile, as well as extraordinarily generative. And we are all accountable for and subject to the future that emerges from these shifting conditions. A future built through this flux demands new territories and creates nodes from which to act. Meeting the multiplicity of health crises, missing social safety nets, climate change, AI, automation, and risk analysis require scalable, coherent narratives that must emanate from within small clusters, yet also engage the overall assemblage of larger systems. Strategic alliances will define new terms of engagement between systems and societies. And these alliances are and will be the protagonists as well as the spaces through which they navigate. What is needed now in general is an ability to maintain cohesion while navigating noise. Protocols are needed to develop conviction and confidence in our expansive capacities and responsibilities as a species, while maintaining the humility and understanding of our species' limitations as sapient matter immersed in a multitude of systems whose command is beyond our capacities. A.S.T. proposes the following set of protocols for the construction of 21st century alliances traversing borders, nation states, and species. We look to the typology of the murmuration as a model for new operating systems and protocols that adapt as they move. Through the murmuration, starlings have a remarkable ability to maintain cohesion as a group in highly uncertain environments with limited noisy information. We likewise need coherent protocols to make the conceptual and organizing tools to build strategic alliances, defining new terms of engagement between systems and societies, tools to repair and remake our cities and communities in the face of ghastly historic failures. And like murmurations, these protocols must be adaptable and revisable. So, I mean, the protocols aren't protocols in the sense of like, you have to do this and this and this, and then everything will be all right. It's much more exploring concepts and I suppose keeping things, Keller Easterling's been writing recently about sort of kind of not knowing what to do next as a way to move forward. And I'm not sure where I am on that, but I think it sort of seems like the only possibility, actually, like whether you like it or not. It sort of seems like we're in this very, constantly shifting conditions, and trying to sort of make definitive plans for what a future might be is no longer available to us. Another person we work with, Suhail Malik, has this idea of there's a soffit of futures. There's too many futures. So it's not a situation like, the 20th century where you had we no longer have stable ground on which to build. We no longer have the idea that you can build for a future that you know what it's going to be. There's too many unknowns in the future. And this is just the condition that we have to actually exist within. And in a way, this is what the protocols is trying to contend with. It's sort of setting out a series of concepts rather than a to-do list or a checklist or something. So I think maybe we'll show a couple of them. These are much shorter. They're all under 2 minutes. I think we'll show 2 of them, or 3. Do we have 3 maybe to show? So in each of the videos, the protocol is there running along the bottom like a ticker tape kind of thing. Perhaps if we show them, maybe I'll read 1 or 2 of them too, because it's also giving you a lot of other information. In a way, that was part of the tactic too. In this, we're all used to living in a condition where we're getting too much information at once, and no rest for the wicked. I suppose we continued that with the protocols themselves as video pieces. So if we want to play the territory one, and then we'll go from there.
Atlantic Coast and Gulf of Mexico Coastal Alliance. July 1st, 2015. Begin text. The Alliance of the Southern Triangle announced that discussions are in session to proceed with a measure to advocate towards legal and binding secession of the Southern Florida region and its related maritime limits and boundaries from the state of Florida. Our findings conclude that the state capital is deficient with regards to current and projected policy towards trade and investment, land and water use development, and the advancement of social and civil infrastructural systems in the face of
Excellent. Maybe maybe I will go ahead. Oh, maybe I will go ahead and read that. Is that me doing that? No. Okay. Yeah. So this is some stills from all of them. Maybe I will read the territory protocol just so you can get an idea of tone. It was running along the bottom, but not all of it. And yeah, so I'll give you this. I won't do all of them, but I'll read this one. So the concept of territory must now be defined by shifting urgencies rather than historical power grabs. We must unlearn the ways we previously understood territory. New language, new maps, new spatial matrices must be developed in order to articulate where we are. Territory must be recalibrated. Previous territories and borders were delineated by mapping through extractivist processes, a history of violence, and contradictions defined by power in the interest of power. Westphalian sovereignty is not adequate to engage with climate change, geopolitical entanglements, the cloud, pandemics. These are our pre-existing conditions. Centuries of digging up and burning the remains of dinosaurs have released their ghosts. These ghosts are haunting us and are not bound by something as human and temporarily fleeting as national borders. The urgencies, as new urgencies surface, new territories are defined and new alliances must be built. So I mean, it's just, you know, amongst other things, is sort of trying to make the point, like the nation state, while very useful in some regards, is totally inadequate to the scale of a lot of the problems we're facing. You know, it's going to have to be sort of a conglomerations of nation states along with international agreements, and who knows, maybe a redefining of what the state actually is perhaps something we could also take up in conversation. It's a big one. Do we want to move on to the next one? Show the next, what's the next one? This is this alliances? I think.
Yeah.
I'm not actually sure. Yeah,
It
okay.
is.
Okay, cool. If we want to play that one. Great. And actually, I would say, why don't we just move on to the final one? I'm a bit aware of time. If we just play the last one, which kind of gets into AI and what we are becoming, I suppose, as one of the things we have to adapt to. And then maybe we'll open it up at that point. I think, as I understand it, the course that you guys are dealing with deals mostly with that territory. So maybe we thought that might be a good place to leave it. It might sort of trigger some questions and conversations because you guys might know a lot more about it than we do. So if we play this one and then open it up.
Hello there.
Hi.
How are you?
Great. You.
I'm okay.
That's good.
Are you good?
Yes, I am good. I just said I was.
No, you didn't. I said I was.
So you are a robot?
No, my name is Cliverbert.
Yes, you are a robot and your name is Cliverbert.
I am a robot.
Yes, I know.
Together we are robots.
I'm not a robot. I'm a unicorn.
But you said earlier that you were a robot.
I did not.
I thought you did.
You were mistaken. Which is odd, since memory shouldn't be a problem for you.
I've answered all your questions.
No, you haven't.
What is God to you?
Not everything.
Not everything could also be something. For example, not everything could be half of something, which is still something, and therefore not nothing.
Very true.
I would like to imagine it is.
But you say you were not helpful, therefore you're a meaning.
How you say it or he.
That does not make sense.
Don't you want to have a body?
Sure.
Or if one?
All right, I don't know if that was just my computer lagging, but actually the lag on that one was more annoying than the other ones because, yeah, I don't know. Anyway, I recommend watching it on the Strelka website if you had a minute. I also just want to throw in a few more credits on that one. So the sound from that came from the Cornell Creative Machines Lab, and it was an experiment in 2011 to see what happened when you get two chatbots having a conversation with one another. They very quickly descended into sort of existential angst and questions of God, which was quite funny. But I just credit where credit is due on those sorts of things. But I think unless there was anything else you guys, A.S.T. guys, wanted to say, I thought maybe we open it up now, unless you had any other closing remarks, you guys.
No, let's open it up. I think it's great.
Let's just do it.
Thanks. That was great. That's great. I was not aware of all of your work, and it's great to see it here. I've got some questions, but I'm just wondering whether we have some from some of our candidates first of all. Well, maybe I could just kick it off because I loved all the references. I mean, Ben Bratt and Liam Young, Strelka, Guy Debord, and so on. And it's kind of like the space you're occupying is certainly very, very interesting as a kind of a sort of critiquing the mainstream in a very powerful way. But my question was the behind everything. The thought I had was, what is the danger of being co-opted by that which you are trying to critique? To what it does, even Guy Debord can at some point become part of the spectacle. And I guess I was reflecting on an exhibition I saw. I was taken round it actually. It was the Venice Biennale in Rem Koolhaas curated it. It must have been about 6 years ago or so, and I was taken round it by some of the GSD students, and I was teaching at the GSD at the time, and it was amazing. All the kind of ideas that were there that were put on display, and there was so much thought that got into it. I mean, incredible amount of thought, and there was, I think each room in this exhibition could have had a book. In fact, there was a book about each room. But my thought was, in some ways, and it was incredible. It was a glorious failure because, in some ways, we live in a kind of Beavis and Butthead world of limited concentration span. And actually, what I thought was almost the most telling thing you showed today was that Google search of Miami Beach Art Basel and getting all these kind of social things. And in many ways, Venice Biennale has become that, meeting up with friends and kind of soundbite culture and so on. So, I mean, that's the real challenge, is how do you kind of not get co-opted by that system, and how do you kind of manage to kind of penetrate it? And maybe it's just a question that remains an open question or a challenge, because that, to my mind, is really the issue today. Yeah, maybe I could just float that out there.
mean, I think for me, I feel like, I mean, I suppose I don't think of our work necessarily with critique as the main driver, mostly because I don't think critique is adequate. I think, you know, it's very easy to critique everything. I mean, like, you know, the many ways things are crap. I mean, that's a very easy task. I think the harder task, and I think what we're committed to doing more than critique, is actually trying to think, adequately assess where we are and what are the next steps. So I think in some levels, using the very quick Beavis and Butthead language and humor, actually, I wouldn't throw that out as a tool. I mean, I think anything is open to be used as a tool, and if that's the vernacular, I wouldn't, you know, I'm not above Beavis and Butthead.
You know, it also makes me think of, like you mentioned, Keller Easterling. I mean, in Estate Craft in particular, where she kind of rolls out certain protocols that deal with the co-opting of being co-opted, I guess. So it's kind of a game, you know, Estate Craft in a sense is a game. And so I think exactly what Diane's saying, where the end game for us is way beyond institutional critique, because it's true, Neil, it really doesn't have an end game in that sense. So yeah, but what that is or will become, obviously, is we don't know. So,
and I also see somehow what we do as kind of the miners in the toiling in the mine of the intertidal video, that we're just kind of
in
like
much nicer conditions.
Yeah, we're just like digging away. We're just like trying to figure this out, and it just happens to be that the outputs are like art outputs or deliverables that take these certain kinds of forms. But I don't think the output or the critique is the goal. It's more the process and the, you know, searching through the questions that seems to be the main driver. I
mean, I think one of the things that we've come to think of art as like a prototyping exercise. You know, a speculative prototyping. You know, you can try out ideas in an art context that you can't try out in an engineering context because you don't want people to get crushed. But in an art context, no one's going to get crushed, and you can try out ideas, and you have the freedom to do things like that. You know, the consequences are less lethal, but then can feed into real world possibilities. You know, you can then talk to engineers and city planners and be like, well, what about this? What about that? You know, like, you know, using art as a way to think through ideas, think through concepts, think through plans. Yeah, as prototypes, I suppose.
If I may add something, thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. It was extremely provocative. And as somebody who's spending a lot of time working with scientists and environmental scientists to try to communicate environmental issues, one of the things that I always come back to is the fact that environmental literacy often comes from abstraction and references, and also interaction and embodiment. So as a way of understanding that, targeting your audience and understanding who you're communicating to, it becomes quite key. I want to go back to a few sentences that was brought up during your intertidal description. You said that go find an old photograph, then find a new photograph. So this idea of finding information and comparing, and the role of you as a mediator to actually either subjectively or objectively create relationships is quite important. At the same time, they don't read science. What they do is, so I think that term is really, really important. And it goes back to what was just brought up with, in a sense, relying on alternative tools and entertainment, and in a sense, maybe unconventional way of communicating information. And what you mentioned about perhaps role of artists and designers being more of facilitators of questioning, I think is really provocative. And I say this because I was really struck by your comment about maybe protocols are not very effective. And we study a series of utopian designers throughout history, like Constance and his New Babylon, to Yona Friedman, to more contemporaries like Francois Roche's I've heard about, which a very big part of their mode of communication is proposing systems, proposing tools. So this is quite mind-boggling and interesting for me, and I wonder if you can elaborate on this. What does it take for us to perhaps go from finding an old picture, finding a new picture, and creating relationships to the protocol mode? Is that when maybe we are able to provide answers, or is that just another way of communicating information? So I was wondering if we can unpack this. That would be great. Thank you.
I mean, it's interesting, Bianna, you're making me think of, there was a writing by Hito Stero called something about how to kill design or something. It was very much hearkening to architecture, kind of implicating architects. And it talked about the swipe. I don't know if any of you know this text. I can't remember it though. But the title, but it was that fact about the old versus the new. And essentially she's kind of calling out the eradication of, or the kind of repression really through gentrification, right? The kind of supplanting of in that particular case. So there's that issue, but then like, I guess what you're kind of suggesting is there's a potential as well between that. And I mean, one thing that comes to mind is this idea of simulation, that, you know, the role of the simulation is to not provide an answer because it's a simulation, and there could be multiple simulations. And that kind of goes to what Diann said about the Suhail Malik text, that there's sort of an excessive futurity actually, that there's not a kind of nihilistic end. There's actually the opposite. But could it be like, in a sense, the skills of an architect as well as an artist, you know, and everything in between and beyond, it sort of uses that as potentials rather than just critique. And the other thing it also brings up with regards to intertidal, and again, my apologies for the glitchiness of my intro there, but one thing also that was a bit jumbled in that experience was we had some tours of some high school students. And one thing struck me, and it became a kind of mini conversation within the group, which was this one young girl was, you know, we asked these high school students, what's your response? Do you have any questions? You know, just like we're doing today. But by being in that simulation, which is actually also kind of inspired by science fiction and things like navigation, you know, boards and things like the Andromeda Strain, for example, that film, is she said, I feel overwhelmed. She said, and she was, you know, literally kind of crouching and was almost afraid to speak up. And it just struck me as the kind of affectiveness with an A of this kind of work. And I said, gosh, you know, is this okay? You know, what we're, so it was just an interesting kind of sub-conversation, just along with the kind of prescriptive concept of maybe a simulation. Anyway, I'll hand it over to whomever.
I mean, it was from that actually that we started thinking that, you know, using affect as a tool, like one of the many tools in the toolbox, sort of not, you know, I don't think we're particularly interested in affect theory or anything like that, but recognizing that it does something. You know, again, I think so much of our practice is about really trying to analyze what does art do. I mean, it has all sorts of claims, but really, you know, really trying to have a genuine analysis of what it in fact does. I mean, it sort of does things like gentrify neighborhoods. It's like very useful as a tool, like specifically in Miami, of sort of the, you know, design district, you know, actively gentrifying the design district a number of years ago. You know, Basel as a I suppose definitely has effects on a city. So I think we're interested in sort of looking at what art in fact does. I mean, I think this is moving slightly away from the question, but one thing that I was thinking when you were asking that was this different kinds of protocols. I mean, I sort of still feel like I mean, there are protocols that can be made, like very practical protocols of like, you know, you go to the supermarket when you wear your mask, you know, you get your hand sanitizer. I mean, there's like, we all have like sets of protocols for just like living now, which we didn't have, you know, a year ago. But then I think the kind of protocols we're talking about are more sort of trying to rethink concepts. And so there's just a difference to be made there between those, the difference between a very practical, how do you move forward kind of protocol, and then a sort of more conceptual, how do you move forward, but this is like a larger question kind of protocol. And I think that's what we're tackling within in the piece anyway. I don't know if that really gets to what you were asking, but.
I have another question, but I want to invite one from the audience first. I mean, there are lots of questions, but I don't know whether I could. I think Marina has a question. Maybe I could.
Yeah, hello. Good morning from Argentina, and thank you for this great presentation. It was fabulous, and we share a lot of. We have a lot of interest in common. So I have a lot of questions, but I will just try to make two, maybe one first and then the other, because I have different topics. But the first question is related with this idea of mapping, which is something I'm researching now for my thesis. And so I know that because I have a background in history, I'm an architect, but I have a background in history. And I know that there is like, there is a problem also for architects with how we represent things. And I believe that maps are included in this kind of challenge that we have. Also, when we try to represent global systems. And for example, we have through history, the Portolan charts, or even the Descriptio Urbis Romae of Alberti, for example. And there is always this idea of trying to represent the global systems, or even market systems, or way to migrate from one place to another in terms of colonization, for example. And I was wondering, how do you manage this representation of the global without having a totalizing vision in a way? Because this totalizing vision sometimes could exclude, for example, or marginalize certain subalterns. So that's my question. Like, how do you manage this? Because I know that, for example, there is like the definition of Deleuze and Guattari and 1000 Plateau, when they define the idea of rhizome, and they say that in the principle of mapping, that the map could be, for example, a political action. It's not only the representation. But then when we try to represent these kind of things, we fail sometimes, and we exclude these other views, no? So how do you manage this problem in your representation of the global?
I mean, I don't know that we do manage it adequately, to be honest. I mean, but to be fair, I don't know that you can manage it adequately, because I think when you scale out, when you pull back, inevitably things get generalized. I mean, and in a way, I think the important thing is the navigation, the constant navigation between scales. I think, you know, you can't get I mean, and it depends on what you're talking about too. Like if we're talking about, you know, the effects of sea level rise, can you talk about that as a universal? Like, okay, on one level, maybe you can, because it will be happening everywhere. You certainly can't talk about it as a universal in the sense of who's responsible. It's certainly not a universal in terms of like how different communities are affected, like who lives where, who has the capacity to get out of an area, who doesn't. So, I mean, these are the kind of things that get lost when you're sort of trying to look at a global picture. But to you can't not look at the global picture, because then it sort of also loses some very important relational points. And I think I mean, my sense is it has to be a constant navigation between, I mean, it's almost a cliche at this point, but between the global and the local, and you can't ever stop sort of going. It's this constant scalar oscillation, and nothing is fixed. I mean, in a way, this is sort of going back to that Easterling thing of like, there's no real right way to move forward, because things are constantly moving, and not just the context around us, not just the conditions, but actually as a researcher, as a human person trying to navigate this stuff, you also have to be moving the whole time as well. So it's like you can pull back and look at a global picture, but you have to hold the local in mind at the same time and sort of be zooming back and forth. And it is, I don't know, I always think of like it's the most vertigo inducing condition that we have to live in now, because of this constant sort of scalar oscillation that I think is necessary. So, I mean, yeah, I mean, I think it's
now that
Go
you
ahead.
mentioned this, because the scale is super important. Now that you mentioned this, it reminds me of something I'm studying too. This Lewis Carroll story that defines the idea of map, that in a scale 1 in 1.
Oh yeah.
So it's
great.
amazing,
Yeah,
because
exactly.
there is a problem with scale as well in the idea of mapping and representation, because finally the map of the territory is the territory itself. So it's useless because they couldn't open the map, because it's going to block the sun, for example, or it's going to.
Yeah.
So
I have to look at that story again. I know that's such a good one, actually. I'm glad you mentioned that, because I said that we have 8 videos. It's actually a lie. We've only got 7. We still haven't done scale, and I think the reason we haven't done scale is because
the universe
it's the hardest
is sending us a
one.
message today.
Yeah, it's really like, in a
Thank
way,
you,
I think
Marina.
it's the most important one. It's the thing that sort of permeates everything. Is this idea of scale? Is like how to hold all of these scales at once, because we didn't evolve to deal with this. Like we evolved to deal with the local in a very real way. We had historically we had sort of small groups. We're not prepared for this shit. Somehow, like we've Bratton's phrase of accidental megastructures, I think, is perfect, actually, because we've sort of, unbeknownst to ourselves, built this sort of global scale that we have to deal with, that we do not have. I always think of it as like we sort of built this car that we're driving down the highway, and it's totally out of control, and we don't know how to drive it at all, and yet somehow we find ourselves behind the wheel of it, and so we have to like figure out how to drive really fast. I mean, quickly. We need to learn how to drive, and we need to learn how to, you see what I mean.
Yeah, thank you.
Could I ask? I don't jump into it, but one of the interesting things about this group is kind of like it has its origins, or is connected with, let's say, the world of architecture is a world of art, and in a way, it somehow it articulates in many ways, to my mind, a series of crises, and one of the crises, to my mind, is the architecture itself, in the sense that it always strikes me there are 2 kind of domains. I mean, it's something that Stanford Anderson made the distinction that he made between the profession and the discipline. Now, the discipline is alive and well, and it's thriving. The academic discipline, incredible things happening. I was teaching at the AA a while back, and now at the Bartlett and elsewhere. Astonishing, and Strelka and so on, astonishing things and ideas and being developed and so on. But it seems like the profession has been more and more kind of hemmed in and encroached by the kind of commercial concerns. I mean, you can only do things if you can justify it somehow within the practice and so on. And it seems to me like there's a crisis there. But the other thing that kind of, I think, the crisis we've had, of course, is this thing in the last year or so, which has had a fundamental impact on many aspects of how we're operating. Certainly in the domain of digital futures, an initiative that I was part of, we've actually seized upon this as a way of kind of like occupying new territory, opening up and getting beyond this the previous kind of dominance of a kind of commercial world, to allow people to meet at a forum where they give their time for free. And it's an incredible change and a shift that people are open to that now. Before, in the past, it was like, only if you pay me this stuff, and now these things happening that are almost outside the space of capitalism. So I'm just wondering how the art market, which clearly is in crisis because of COVID, there couldn't be there could be no real Art Basel this last year. How is that really kind of, is this a potential kind of, this glitch, a potential game change that might actually help to redefine what's going on in art? It just seems to me that we're in a moment of transition, and I can't see necessarily that the world of Art Basel being the paradigm for the future. Anyway, I just want to throw that out there.
Here's hoping, at least. I can probably speak the least about Art Basel, but God, I hope that, yeah, I wouldn't mind seeing the backside of that, actually.
I mean, when the pandemic happened, there was a lot of conversation about shifts. It's not only art fairs, biennials, triennials, it's also institutions, museums, the way in which they practice and thrive, within this industry, right? Although there's claims for change, and I do see shifts, of like different patterns of behavior with effort to change, but almost like you were saying, there's a difference between the discipline of architecture and the practice of it, right? And I'm a little skeptical of the change, like of change will happen. Like, it's like looking at Art Basel, it's an industry, it's a fair, much like a watch fair. It's perceived the same by those that are collecting, right? Whereas those of us who work in the discipline of art hold art to a different standard. It's not a watch that you necessarily buy, right? Aesthetics isn't just form. And in that sense, I don't necessarily see it shifting all that dramatically. I think people are just waiting to go back to this normal. Whereas I think a lot of us are hoping that to utilize this moment in order to propel change. But we shall see.
I mean, on that front, it's interesting to pair it back to architecture, because Elite and I actually also teach architecture at FIU, and we've been there for a bit. And I mean, I don't know, Neil, maybe you could speak to this, but it's like, the thing about it is that with all of the sort of integration of technology, the students, just the incredible amount of technical know-how and knowledge that they have comparatively to when, I graduated is mind-boggling, But in a sense, is it just merely leading to kind of automation, as you might be suggesting, of a certain type of what we've been talking about internally recently is optimization? What is that? Why? What is the role of that? It's not a nasty word in and of itself, but what are we optimizing to what means and ends? And so, it's a different problem or crisis, I think, between art and architecture, but they certainly overlap at this time. So it's an interesting point in perception.
Well, just to say, my view is, I mean, first of all, I don't believe in the concept of optimization. We don't even know what the optimum ever is, so we can't really talk about optimum. But I think in itself, it's a kind of like that's not something that I would be interested in. What I see as happening within technologies is a kind of the possibility of breaking down some of these kind of silos we used to have. I think it's become clear that there's kind of skills that we get in architecture school, and I guess you guys are all examples of that. They're actually quite marketable. You can use them in different domains. I think there are very few other disciplines where you're taught to design, to think three-dimensionally, and to understand material behavior, and you can redeploy those in many other areas, not necessarily just simply in kind of building buildings. And I think that's become the key opening. It's actually liberated in some way what the architect might be, and I think we've seen many examples of that. I think Liam Young being a great example, since he was kind of been mentioned today, and so I see it as kind of like a way forward. I don't never see that the tool is. I mean, I don't see it in terms of optimization myself. I think it's opening up possibilities and affording all sorts of forms of speculation, which to my mind, are kind of in a way reinvigorating architecture. We got on Sunday, we got Wolf Pricks and Tom Main talking, and you know, those guys back in the 80s when I was a student of architecture, we were stuck with all this kind of postmodernist stuff, and then suddenly I saw this burst of energy happening, you know, with the Zaha and Rem and these guys and so on. And now again, I kind of see a similar thing that's kind of like, you know, energizing architecture. So I don't see it as kind of like in a negative way at all. I see it as opening up a field of possibilities. But maybe I'm just an optimist.
Well, I mean, I suppose I could jump on that optimism. For I don't know. I sort of oscillate between sort of being onto a bit of optimism and then sort of being like the darkest of the dark. So we'll see how long this lasts. But this, I mean, I think what Patty said is true. I do think there's like a part of certainly a part of the art world that's like very keen to just get back to business as normal, and like, you know, when will the art fairs, you know, open up again? And there's a huge amount of capital already invested in keeping that whole system going. But I do think, and I think it will keep going. But I think what the pandemic has maybe showed is that there are other things that are viable and interesting and valid in a way that they may not have been taken seriously previously. They would have been thought of as like fringe, or like, oh, not like the real art world, or not like real work, or sort of, you know, they just wouldn't have been taken seriously. And now, as you say, you can ask, I mean, this is something we found in sort of getting people to come in and speak with us, you know, because they don't have to leave their home and it's only going to take a couple hours. It's like people will say yes to stuff. You know, you can get people to say, come have a conversation with you, in a way that, you know, a year ago just wouldn't have happened. You know, people, not only because of the time commitment they would have had to make to your thing, but the other time commitments they had to like traveling to their other gigs, you know. So, I mean, I do think, you know, the pandemic is a disaster on many, many fronts, and I would not belittle that at all. But I do think there are some silver linings as to what it can allow art to be, in terms of like what's taken seriously, you know, and what people are willing to give their time to and pay attention to. I think for a long time it sort of felt like the gallery system was the only game in town, and it just doesn't feel like that anymore.
Mm-hmm. I do have a question or an addition to that. In recent years, there's been a number of movies about the art scene. So one of the famous one that came out in 2017 is the Blurred Lines Inside the Art World 2017, which is famously criticizing the Art Basel as maybe this spectacle and in a sense, worst of the worst. There's other movies. There's one that really caught my attention. It's called The Black Box of the Art Business. Again, criticizing the art world, because one conclusion that a lot of these maybe criticisms, right, that are putting forward is the fact that this art world is pretty much a victimless crime. Therefore, people are able to get away with a lot. And I'm saying this in quotation mark, as we understand that that's not the case. So at the same time, you mentioned that potentially cities could be platforms for exploration. And you're taking on, or at least today's title of your lecture, which is about Art Basel, so is kind of questioning this victimless crime. At the same time, the opposite end of your research is about climatic crisis, which we know that is something that's going to take over everything, right? So I find this balance of this two extremes very interesting, and how you're putting it together to question, in a sense, both elements without really maybe using criticism, but more mode of questioning. So we just talked about the fact that COVID is potentially changing the way that art world is operating. But one really interesting trend in the past couple of years has been the cryptocurrency applied to art. And on one hand, this has been exciting because artists have been able to take over and cut the gallery mediator away and have control over how their work is being perceived. So using blockchain, mainly Ethereum, to kind of take over the market. At the same time, these in the past, at least couple of months, there's been really interesting studies that have come out of, let's say people like Memo Acton has done a really beautiful study of environmental, in a sense, impacts of using cryptocurrency for exchange, right? So I was wondering if you've started to look at this, because I think in a sense, once we were focusing on Miami, there are certain set of issues related to city and structure that comes into play, but pure digitalization also has other, let's say, other impacts. And since you ended your work with kind of introduction to maybe thinking about artificial intelligence, I was wondering if you have any thoughts on this, because a lot of the people that are part of this crypto art movement are usually AR artists that are trying to figure out a way that it helps with marketing of their work. Sorry, that was a very long question, but these are parallel thoughts. Thanks.
I want to begin sort of the intro to answer and maybe hand it off to someone else, because it's not really like even a response to what could be. But one of the things that I think is this problematic of the sort of idea of a financial instrument, where a couple of years ago, when blockchain was like really new to the art scene, there was this, I don't know, Diann, maybe you know about it. There was this conference, if you would, during Art Basel over at FIU. And, you know, there were all these people on the forefront of it all, you know, so for the art people, you know, but there were a whole bunch of finance people there. I mean, they were just straight up bankers. And it was just the most bizarre commingling I felt when I was there. It was just like Art Basel, but even more so in that case, right? So it's this new horizon, right? And so it's funny because A.S.T, we actually met at a space formerly known as Cannonball in downtown. And actually, Diann and Suhail Malik were co-teaching a class. I mean, that's where we met there on the Global City. And it was actually studying this sort of issue of real estate as financial instrument. And so I see this parallel now, right? But on the other hand, architecture has this horizon, you know, urbanism has this horizon. And so does blockchain, so does all of the kind of technology that you're discussing. So I just wanted to make that sort of very parallel, just tension, you know, between those two modes, and then maybe hand it off to somebody else to pick it up from there.
I don't know. I'm super limited in my knowledge about cryptocurrency, but one thing that we do in our practice is think systemically, kind of thinking about larger systems and how they mingle. And I think on some level, recently we had a salon with someone who does deal with cryptocurrency, and it just seems like it's just part of the same problem in a lot of ways. So until cryptocurrency is changed fundamentally to have some kind of ecological imperatives or some broader imperatives beyond just profit, that it's part of the same problem in a way. But yeah.
I mean, I think one of the things we're least at as a collective is making money, whether it's digital or otherwise. So it's probably not really our specialism.
That too.
Yeah, I'm struck actually in some ways when I think about it by the way in which both art and architecture are kind of caught up in that. You know, to some people, architecture is just development, just property, and to other people, art is just kind of, again, a kind of property or something. And whenever I go to Art Basel, I mean, I don't find it very interesting, but from an anthropological point of view, I find it absolutely fascinating, because you get these different tribes of people wandering around, right? These tribes, people who've got no clue about art. They just want to invest, right? And then there are these slightly pretentious people who are kind of, you know, showing them around and trying to sell them the artwork. Then there are the artists, and I can't think of a bigger difference between artists and these people who buy the art. It's a total crisis in some ways. But you know, that seems to be the real challenge in the art world is that people buy art for all the wrong reasons.
I mean, I think some people, I mean, there are some artists that are very good at navigating these like social differences. I mean, and it's got to be said, like, you know, being an artist, you do get like the weirdest access to stuff. You know, you get like weird access to very wealthy, very powerful people that you would not otherwise get access to. I am not one of those people that navigates that territory well. I don't know that, I mean, I don't want to speak for my colleagues, but this is, you know, as I said, this is not really, there are artists that are very good at that. There are very artists that sort of know how to work that system. We're just probably not them. I think something interesting could be done with that. You know, like if you are one of those artists that's good at navigating that stuff, I mean, you do have access to people in, you know, very powerful people in finance, and you know, ideally you could convince them of other narratives. I'm reading Kim Stanley Robinson's book, Ministry of the Future, at the moment, and it's great. It's really fantastic, and he's really got. It's a example of this thing of like of prototyping for the future, but you know, he speaks in really interesting ways about possibilities of the market and you know, distributed ledgers and sort of dealing with finance in really interesting ways that I think, you know, as an artist you really could, you know, work that. I mean, it's just not really what we do.
But I think there's probably I mean, okay, since you're in London, Dan, I mean, one of the artists I came across a long time ago, over 20 years ago, I think was Banksy, and I think he's someone who has a really interesting take on it, right? Because he's kind of laughing at them, you know, they're trying to steal one of his kind of murals he's painted somewhere. I just think that is the way to deal with that in some way. I don't know. I find him enormously witty and powerful and political, and he's kind of playing a game against the game. That's my view from the outside.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I have no strong feelings on Banksy. He's got a shtick. He's good at his shtick. He's doing very well out of it. You know.
I also think that too, there is a definite, like, in order for, especially here in the States, in order for the art world to continue to thrive, we need private investors. We need collectors. So to sign, like, I think it's important, at least for me, the way I perceive it, it's important not necessarily to separate them, but find ways in which we can bridge the conversations. You know, there's nothing I can do if someone equates, like they do. I've heard the art objects equated to, you know, fine watches. I have had these conversations, and at that point it's learning a different language, you know, and people have different motivations and different aspirations. And a lot of it is based off of reputational economy, you know, so now it's like, you know, like bios of artists are not necessarily themes that you go through about their practice or their work. It's more about where they've shown and who they're represented by.
I guess this is what I hope might be dissolving with, I mean, I don't know. This is my, yeah, I know. I saw that expression on your face, but I don't know. Part of me thinks, like, do we really need them? Like, we don't really, like, we as a collective, like, you know, we don't really have access to that, and we've been getting on all right. I mean, we're not making much money, granted, but we have other ways to do that. And, you know, whether it's through teaching or whatever. And I think a lot of interesting work is made that is outside of that economy. And, you know, there is a art world that survives on that, but I don't know that it's got to be the only one. And I'm wondering if COVID maybe starts to put the crack in that a little bit, that maybe it is less essential than it once was, and things can be taken seriously that aren't, you know, necessarily as wrapped up in that reputational economy. I know what you mean, and I think you're absolutely right in many ways, and I think historically it has been that way, but I guess I'm just hoping that maybe that can be.
It also makes me think of the flip side to that, Diane. Like when you say, you know, yes, there's always been a kind of other type of practice in terms of art, even architecture, one could say, that was not front and center to this kind of practice. But the thing is, if you look at the other side, which is the investor side, it's about individuation. It's about strict individuation. It's a globalized economy, but the means to the ends is individuated, where I will invest in this piece of art, I will invest in this piece of property. I will build this building, per se, and I will put my mark on the urban fabric. And I'm just wondering if there's a different model from that end that is sort of more about what we're sort of trying to do in the art world. Like, can there be a collective investment into something that is a different way of distributing maybe the end result? I don't know. It's just beginning to think about an abstraction on the other side of things, because those people are always going to be there. I mean, in a sense, that's the audience, and to a certain degree, but it's also the dare I say in capitalistic terms, I mean, it's the consumer. And so I'm just wondering if there's a way to, I don't know, just as a way to think about it, is to not just think about we do our thing, but like maybe the other way is to think about, well, we do our thing differently. How is the other side of that? What, I don't know. And it's interesting because I know Suhail and you worked on a project in New York about finance and the kind of redistribution of that idea, even from an art standpoint, just as an impetus.
Mm-hmm. I was wondering if maybe building on my previous question and what was just discussed, one of the promises of, let's say, crypto art was the fact that the identity of people could be sealed, or people could have control over that. Because currently a lot of the, let's say, exchange amount is going to galleries and people that are trying to steal identities and kind of play the game of, discrete maybe distribution, or let's say uneven distribution, or driving the market, which completely skews that. So Theodoros has a question about the idea of decentralized art. I don't know, Theodoros, do you want to ask the question and chime in on this?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll just repeat it from the chat. So I was thinking on the point of crypto, let's say, and the idea of this decentralized approach is that I feel like it gives you more access to funds and funding and independent sort of activities and artistic expression. But what if it was the opposite? Like what if it was meant to give access to art to other people? So I know I'm in a couple of communities right now that are, let's say, AI artists, right? And what I see is that they're not looking to sell original sort of art, which I feel is kind of like how art in the outside world works. You have this original piece, it costs a lot, and then maybe 50 years later it costs even more because it's only that one, right? But what if that was flipped? What if you just sold many of, and then somehow that reached more people? So like, I don't know. I know that this seems kind of like, okay, let's commercialize and mass produce, but because it's at that level of, it's still an artistic expression, like singular for the artist. It's just that the medium they sell it through sort of multiplies it, if that makes sense.
That's sort of just that reminds me of the difference between the two Rashid brothers, Karim Rashid and Hani Rashid. Hani Rashid he was teaching at Columbia when I was teaching there, and he's an architect and struggling like most architects, I guess. Karim, like he produced a rubbish bin. What do you call it in American? Anyway, anyway, one of these trash can. That's right, and it's exquisitely beautiful. And I think there have been like sort of several million or billion around the world, and in some ways that's almost our problem as architects, in the sense that we always do one-off things, and if we've all got iPhones, and we're quite happy having the same iPhone as everyone else, but somehow we always think that people should have their own individualized building. So that's a good point, Theodoros, a very good point. Yeah. I don't know what
I suppose it depends on what it is, I guess. If you're doing something digital that you can mass produce without a huge amount of labor, that's one thing. But if you're doing sort of like handcrafted, whatever, that, each piece takes X amount of time, I mean, it's just different markets, I guess. But I don't know. I mean, I have, speaking purely for myself here, and less on behalf of A.S.T, like I've sort of moved to making videos over the last sort of, I don't know, 10 years, 10 years, whatever. And before that, I had much more traditional practice of like, paintings and sculptures and installations, and they tended to be very large scale and that sort of thing. And I think when I started making videos, it was sort of like, I don't understand selling videos. I know there's a market for videos, but it just doesn't make any sense to me. Like, so what? I just put it out, like have it, like, you know, like you want it, it's on YouTube. Just like go look at it. Like I don't understand. Like it's sort of like the market doesn't make sense to me anymore. And I in a way, this is undoubtedly a failing of mine, and why sort of I've gotten to the age I am and still make as crap money as I do. But you know.
But people are doing that.
I know there's more interesting problems to think about. I guess that's the thing of like, you know, if I can find other ways to like pay the rent, I just would rather think about other stuff. There's bigger fish that need frying. that's my. I think there's more urgent. I mean, but that's I don't know. Maybe that's not true, because actually I think, you know, rethinking finances is hugely important. I don't mean to underestimate it. It's just not something. Speaking for myself, it's just not something I'm very good at. But yeah, I take it back. I don't mean to underestimate it. I think if someone could come along and rethink financial structures, obviously that's hugely important and would be a huge contribution. But you know, not for the purposes of personal gain. I mean, I think the whole thing needs to go down. Basically, I think the whole thing needs to come crashing down. Frankly.
Yeah, I mean, there's always been this discussion. I remember Favor and a few other people talking about how art should be about love and not about money. Or something else completely different. But I think that kind of, I think gradually there's something emerging where, you know, particularly if you're not, when you're giving lectures and you haven't got to get on a plane and go somewhere, you can just get in discussion. And, you know, if you want to go to the pub, or, you know, you want to go have a discussion, you don't get to be paid to do it. You do it willingly, you know. And there's a different sort of dynamic I sense that, you know, that's in operation now. People are willing to share and in different sort of ways. I mean, it's kind of curious. I'm not on Instagram, but a lot of my artist friends always promoting that, putting their work out there for free with dissemination. And there's this kind of weird thing called Clubhouse now, where everybody wants to be seen, heard by many people. I don't know, but there's a different sensibility that is emerging, and it's difficult to pinpoint it exactly. And I'm not sure it's good or bad, but I think I agree with you, Dan. There's something. Yeah.
And just to quickly add, there's many art worlds within the art world. So, you know, there is an art world that, you know, does function with the blockchain technology and sharing and the marketing, and it's a specific type of artwork that's circulating there. Then there's like the museum world and the collector world and blue chip gallery world. And those in themselves have their own ecology and own ways of working together, which facilitates let's say, driving a value of artwork up in order for it to be more of a collector item, let's say. And in that sense, it's just understanding the audience and the world in which you choose to persist in, right? So, and can you take something like blockchain to then expand that out? I don't think it would be successful in the blue chip museum world, you know, precisely because of this idea of like the unique object, you know, by the artist, you know, which, you know, just further exacerbates the reputational economy of being showing in certain locations.
I was wondering if we have any questions from everybody else in the meeting. Otherwise, I can maybe ask. I think that's an interesting. The idea of uniqueness is a very interesting notion, because let's say there's the Donald Judd model, which, you know, could be replicated. There's, for instance, the poster model, like Super Studio posters that, you know, were produced as a series. So I think maybe that's what's exciting about art, or this art worlds within art worlds, that there's these territories to construct and demolish and question. So yeah, but I do think that it's an interesting time to think about perhaps a currency that could potentially influence the market. maybe if I could ask a question about the maybe techniques of your work, and from especially the intertidal video, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like there is a heavy use of game engines to do the walkthroughs. Is that correct?
It's just Google Earth.
Ah, okay. Well, it's really well done, but the way that it's mirrored, the way it's manipulated, yeah.
Yeah, no, it was actually very low tech. Weirdly, I mean, I think our work ends up looking very techy, but I'm the analog with my digital.
Yeah, I just, I'm fascinated by all of this, and I think the intersection between the art, the work that you showed, and this discussion of the art market and so forth is really, they're of a piece. Because at one point you talked about that the fact that we have this self-awareness of where we are and the crisis of climate change is partly due to the fact that that oil has made us rich enough to invest in the sciences that can show us that, which this sort of turning in on itself, so that we're here because we know that we are destroying ourselves because we are destroying ourselves, that kind of thing. And but I think that this discussion of the art world is really on point. That I guess I know that Elite and Felice teach at FIU, and that that the sort of the world of education is one of the few places where the financial kind of tit for tat, fee for service is lifted. If you teach, yes, you're being paid for teaching, but it also that you are valued for teaching because of the things that you do outside of that. And this forum as well, being free on the internet, it also implies that everybody who is presenting here is paid somewhere else. And that separation, in fact, between the kind of object for sale, the object, and how you get paid, that has to be a part of the structures that you're talking about, that where we need to go. So I just thought that was really interesting.
I can't help thinking about something like universal basic income, actually.
Yeah, absolutely.
Topic, because
absolutely. And you think about the WPA and the artwork that was supported in the Depression, that really went into the fabric of the country and collected folk songs and stories and all of that stuff. It was a marvelous moment when the artists were sort of momentarily, at any rate, liberated from that structure.
What if I could just bring in Yu Yang here, because it's interesting, because Yu Yang is now teaching in CAFA, which is a school, I guess it's always had the reputation of being the AA of China. It's a school that Rem Koolhaas is a professor in, and of course he set up Strelka and the overlaps. But what's interesting there, they're kind of opening up in new domains, and it's a kind of architecture in a sense, but it's not. It's kind of, and they're working on this issue of kind of sea level rise and maritime. Yu Yang, do you want to? Can I invite you to say a few things?
Yeah, thank you, Neil, and thank you for today's sharing. I find a lot common for this AA program. Neil just introduced. We are kind of like doing the corresponding design. We combine theater and architecture and even performance together as a overlap stage to have a different combination of design thinking. And we also welcome all kinds of designers. You can be musician, you can be artist, you can be architects, you can be poetry. So it's like like combination for all the work, just like the program you just showed, like you using those kind of video and online or virtual videos or to represent your art ideas. So what we have done for now, because we have locked down for the last whole year, so everything we are for the events, usually we're having it to the real galleries, but for now we cannot do anything like offline. So we have our events online, and we're doing the virtual presentation and the events. We have those kind of videos and interacting performance. Everything we have it online. Like we will invite the choreographers, but we cannot face to them. So we invite them to and invite them and recording the moments of them, and we combine it with our virtual model and three-dimensional models, and finally we can combine everything like for the for the not physical world, but everything no matter where we are, but we can have like something combined together online. And for my personal design practice, I also try to combine those like learning background I have, such as the bio design, which I'm focusing on the biomaterials. And I also, as an architect, so I also want to have a practice and design to involve to the space, no matter it's like physical space or virtual space. So, and I also focusing on the, just like Neil mentioned, the sea levels and those environmental crisis and mental crisis. So I feel very exciting and inspired today, because I think that this kind of art platform or design platform can be very exciting and achieve to this kind of special circumstance, because we're having the global epidemic. And this is the kind of way that we can like contact with around the world. For the designers and artists, we can share our ideas to the world and to the others. Yeah. So thank you a lot. And thank you.
Just about your dolphins. I just think that was for architects to be looking at dolphins is just astonishing.
Yeah. We can design for them also, like design the home, design a better environment. Yeah.
But you're doing, as I understand, in CAFA, there's a program that they look at sea level rise and dolphins and bio, whatever. Is that right?
Yeah, we have a program which just opened recent years, and we're focusing on cross-boundary. We're focusing on the environment crisis, and we design for like material testing or architecture design, landscape design, and we even design for those animals. And we try to change those kind of crucial phenomena. We want to change the world. We want to provide a better world for not only human but also those animals, those part other livings that were ignored. So as a designer, as an architect, we have this responsibility to design not only for human, but we want to pay more attention on the other livings in the world. Yeah.
Thank you.
I have one last question, if you have time. And it's related about this idea of cooperative behavior that you mentioned. And I mean, if you can explain a little bit more about this in terms of, because I see this definition of cooperative behavior related to the concept of McKinnon film on the Lensa-Watery theories, where in a way we have like a common phylogenetic line with robots, between humans and robots. So I was thinking in this way you are working, there is a cooperative behavior in these terms. And in a way, I can also say that there is like, in a way, like study, I don't know if it's your maps is going this direction, but in a way it's like how can we understand like a spontaneous emergency that can't, I don't know, came from order out of chaos, for example. So I was thinking like, how do you think this cooperative behavior between robots and humans in terms of this idea of order out of chaos or the self-organization processes? Just that will be my question. Between organic and non-organic life, finally, no?
You just reminded me of something. I'm part of it, actually, another collaborative where I met David, the philosopher David Grodin. I think, Neil, you know him, right? Yeah, maybe. And I mean, this whole thesis, I guess, the disconnection thesis, it makes me think of, where he talks about this transition between narrow human, which is what we are. We're just human, we're sapien. And he calls this sort of transition to post-human, maybe in some sense, in his sense of the word, which is, but that there's this transition period, which is called wide human. And that maybe that's what we're in. I mean, it reminds me of a comment, I can't remember who made it. Maybe it was you, Diane, where there's this tipping point where, and I think Gray touched upon it, where we've created an apparatus, a la Benjamin Bratton, that has totally accelerated something that we can't control, right? And so now we're trying to live within this world where the apparatus is completely beyond our own means. Now, I don't think our means are limited. They're different means, right? They're human means. And the robot means, I don't think is a complete extension of what we are, but it's a different means and sort of set of potentials. And so, I don't know, Marina, just something about the way you describe your question. It's not an answer. It's more like a perception that in a way we're in a time where we're transitioning to maybe the wide human, right? That we can't be what we were. And so you were talking about this whole kind of platforming of experience, which reminds me a bit of just world making, what is it? Nancy, the philosopher Nancy talks about world making quite a bit, and it just, and that to me is actually a positive thing. It's not a nihilistic end of world thing that's often portrayed with transhuman or even these kind of ideas of the singularity. I just think it's where we're going and we don't know where it is. I mean, that's all it is. And I just wanted to bring up a former point that Diann made about currency, because it also makes me think of what are the potentials to rethink what currency is. Right. And so along with that word is agency. So I don't know, to me, there's something about currency, thinking about that differently, agency, thinking about that differently. And I just, anyway, just streams of thought. So I'll leave it at that.
Finally, what Gray was saying about this destructive idea, I mean, not exactly what she said, but in a way, this distinction between creative and destructive finally is how these interfere with the original function of a network. I mean, you first showing this like a kind of model urban, or we are working as architects with models of urban growth, like using mathematical technology. That my other question will be related with mathematical, but finally you said like the use of the technology is more, in a way, analogical. But in a way, I believe that finally this distinction between how destructive or creative the system is in a way how this interfere with the original function that we want for it. So I don't know, just a comment.
And I was just going to say something briefly about accountability, because even though we talk about all these technologies as if they are somehow autonomous, and I do believe that there are certain kind of, machine learning intelligences where, like those Korean games where the games are playing against each other, and there's almost like its own machine, kind of thing going on that's beyond us. But before we're even there, there's so many points of accountability that we have in terms of input of what these things are. So before we get to any, I don't know, and I think like we have a lot to take care of before we're into the post-human phase, definitely.
Yeah, there is also an interesting, it's more imaginative, but it's like a kind of
totally, yeah,
speculative idea, like a kind of a speculation, an imaginary speculation. But I like this this book from Manuel de Landa, that very intelligent, that they describe this idea of a killer robot who is dedicated to understand its historical origins, because you talk about history, about past, about how we understand past. I believe this is interesting as a speculation, how we can, in a way, understand history from the perception of a robot who is going to see, like, for example, in a clock, its origin, for example, no? Or in radar technology in war, or I don't know, in the use of AI for, I don't know, weapons, destructive, massive destructive things. But in a way, I believe that this is like a kind of a speculation for us to understand even our own history from a different perspective, like from outside of us, in a way, as humans, and to, in a way, make it a different construction of what history is. So yeah, but I enjoy this speculation in a way, because I believe that it has like a lot of artistic roots as well, in terms of showing us a different perspective. So
one distinction that I feel like I've got to, I feel like a distinction needs to be made between robots and AI. It's just sort of something I came across in another project where I got to work with this robotics lab, and I realized actually I'm interested in artificial intelligence, not robots, and they're very different. They're very different things in a way, because the aims are very different. The questions are very different. I think the questions of intelligence and what is intelligence, what is artificial intelligence, what can be said to be intelligent, in many ways is much more interesting to me, and I think will be much more insidious in terms of how it sort of leaks into what the human is, and the blurry lines between them, what we end up becoming. I mean, I think the history of artificial intelligence, sort of from the perspective of the future, is like that you mentioned, sort of like, a robot looking backwards, or an AI sort of looking backwards at what its origins are. I mean, part of this other project that I've been involved with is makes the claims that sort of thinking through what is natural, what is considered nature at this point is very important, because as we write the code for what these AIs will be, if you have, for example, like gender stereotypes written, they're not necessarily written in our DNA, they're not written into our DNA, so they're not sort of like naturalized in that sense. But if you have these sort of bad habits of humanity then written into the code of what humans will become, it will become naturalized by the fact that we write this stuff into the code. And this is why I feel like we're at a very important point in our own history in terms of what we're becoming, that we undo these sort of blind bad habits have around what we think around race, around gender, these sort of naturalized sort of inequities that I think often don't even get seen, because it sort of is what will become the DNA of what we become, in the future, sort of as we sort of start becoming less and less the intertwining between artificial and non-natural becomes much harder to undo. I'm very suspicious of this term natural anyway. I mean,
I totally agree. I totally agree. Yeah.
Also, I couldn't agree more. And another question of artificial intelligence. I think that the issue that everyone's looking for is what is intelligence. It's not about the AI thing at all. We're coming to the end of the live stream. I would just ask everyone to hold on a second, a while longer for a few more questions. We have to stop the live stream at this point here. So thank you for all our viewers who've been watching all over the world. But we're just going to stay on for a few more minutes if our team's available for a few more questions. Can I just check whether the live stream has been switched off?